Today I'm installing vinyl plank flooring in a makerspace I'm finishing in my basement. We'll start with how to get the site prepared for installation, then we'll move on to layout and how to ensure you don't end up with those thin, lame-looking strips of flooring planks at the end. I'll also give you tips and tricks on cutting this stuff, making sure it snaps into place, and even how to get that final row in without murdering somebody or burning your house down. So grab that bottle of Aleve and let's do this. This video is sponsored by Levoit, a company that makes things like air purifiers, fans, and this awesome cordless vacuum that I'll be demoing later in the video. For my flooring, I've decided to go with a product called Lifeproof that's available from Home Depot. Now, there's a couple great things about this product. First of all, it's waterproof. Secondly, it's a floating floor, meaning I'm not screwing or gluing or fastening these planks to the floor in any way. They just connect to each other, kind of like locking puzzle pieces. I put these in the last room I finished, and my handy-dandy father-in-law and I were able to install flooring in the entire room in under a day, so the learning curve is short. Something else that's nice about this product is that the planks have very nice underlayment attached to them, so you don't have to install any underlayment before laying this stuff down. This means I can install it directly on top of the concrete in my basement. I have links to most of the tools I'll be using in the video description in case you need them. Here's the gear that you're going to need, and most of this stuff you already have in your home. The pull bar here may be something new to you, and I would highly recommend it. Now, the power tools are optional, but recommended. As far as safety gear goes, eye protection is a must when you're cutting with power tools, and you'll also need knee pads or some kind of cushion. You could do what I did and take one of those foam puzzle pieces from the floor of your workout area that you don't use anymore. Hey, it's okay. We know you'll start working out any day now. So how much of your product should you actually buy to ensure you have enough while not overbuying? To figure out how much product you need, you're going to do a little math. I know math is scary, but cheer up, buckaroo, you got this. First, calculate the area of the room you're finishing in square feet, and don't forget to include the closet space. This is a big room at 248 square feet. If your room is a rectangle, just multiply length times width and you'll get there. After calculating area, add an additional 10% for waste. Complete this calculation by taking your area times 1.1. For me, 248 feet squared times 1.1 is about 273. Next, divide this value by how many square feet of flooring material come in a box. Each box of this flooring covers 20.1 square feet, so I'm taking 273 divided by 20.1 and ending up with 13.6 boxes. Finally, since you can't buy just a portion of a box, round up to the nearest whole number, which for me is 14. Boom. Thanks, math. We'll find out if I ended up with too much or too little product here in a bit. The next step is to prepare the floor, and this may be the most important step of the entire process. If you're installing on concrete like I am, you really need to take the time to make sure it's clean and flat. If you're like me and recently installed drywall in the room, use a putty knife and scrape all that old joint compound off the floor. You'll also want to make sure there are no high spots or low spots in the concrete. If there are, you've got a little work to do. I have some high points in this room where the concrete leveler I used meets the original concrete, so I take the time to knock them down with a concrete grinder. It's a dirty job, but absolutely necessary for good installation. Be sure to wear a respirator and hearing and eye protection if you're grinding concrete. Finally, sweep or vacuum the floor really well, as granular bits of debris can get in the way of a tight connection between the vinyl planks you'll be installing next. Now it's time to plan your layout. Since color and pattern can vary between boxes of flooring, many people suggest opening several boxes of your product and pulling planks from each box to ensure that the coloration is the way you want it as you go through your job. Something else you'll want to do is randomize where the joints between planks land. You may be tempted to do a brick style pattern with joints every 24 inches on every other row, but the common opinion is that it looks kind of crusty that way. Some people do a 1/3, 2/3 layout approach, so every third row will have the same joint. Others simply start a new row with the leftover plank portion cut from the last plank in the preceding row, which is what I'll do. Whichever method you choose, randomizing in some way is best so that your pattern is not as noticeable to people. It really needs to blend in and look good. Now it's time to plan ahead and make sure that final row isn't unnecessarily skinny. We'll do a little math for this, so put on your big boy pants. Measure the width of the space you'll be covering. I'm finishing a big room with a width of 210 inches. Divide this by the width of your planks to determine the number of rows you'll lay. According to the box, my planks are 8.7 inches, so 210 divided by 8.7 is about 24.1. So I'll have 24.1 rows of planks in this room when I'm finished. Now, it's best practice to ensure that no plank is skinnier than half of the plank width, so look at the decimal of your value. If it's below 0.5, this means that your final row will be too skinny. With my calculation of 24.1, this means that if I start my first row with full-size planks, then the final row of planks will only have a width of about 0.1 planks, or 0.87 inches. This is no bueno, senor. To resolve this, I'll rip some of the width off of my first row planks, and whatever width I remove from my first row will add directly to my last row. So if I take off almost half of the width of my first row planks, I should be in good shape. I'll take around 40% off of the first row of planks, which will add 40% to the final row, which will put my final row width where it needs to be. So let's talk about how to cut these things. You can cut these kind of like drywall. Use your utility knife to deeply score the surface of the plank. Then pop it along the score line and cut through the underlayment on the back to separate pieces. If you're cutting the planks long ways, the utility knife approach is, in my opinion, extremely difficult. For ripping planks long ways, I would suggest a power tool. You can use a jigsaw, circular saw, or table saw for this. I'm using my DeWalt 20-volt circular saw. I have another complex cut to make before I install my first board, but feel free to skip forward to the next chapter of the video if you want to go directly to the installation portion of the video. One of the planks in my first row will require some extra attention. This is where the wall meets the exterior door, and I want to bring the flooring in here and butt it closely to the door threshold. So 36 1/4 inches of this plank will extend towards that door threshold. I take care to measure the exact dimensions to ensure that this plank sits well and mark my cut lines with a pencil. I feel more comfortable with an oscillating tool for my precision cuts, so I'm using a DeWalt 20-volt oscillating tool for this. Now it's time to install the planks. You always start on the left and work your way to the right with these. These planks have a lower tongue on two sides that allows the next plank to lock into place like this. So the tongue side faces out and the flush side goes against the wall. You'll also need to leave room for expansion, so your planks will need to sit 1/4 inch away from the wall. You can buy spacers for this, or just use shims or something you have on hand. I cut about 2 inches off the thick side of my shims so that they are 1/4 inch at their thickest, and then tape these to the wall as they tend to fall over or get knocked down during installation. The typical starting point will be on your longest wall of your room, but I want to make sure I don't end up with a joint aligning with the area of concrete I ground down earlier, just in case the grinding is a bit uneven. So I'm running my planks perpendicular to that grind line. So I'm starting on this wall with the exterior door. I also don't want a joint in the middle of the flooring in front of this exterior door threshold, so I'm starting with a 30-inch piece on the far left of the wall in order to center that threshold in the middle of just one plank. I set my first piece, the 30-incher, into position. And this is the easiest piece of flooring to install in the entire room. The shims I taped on the wall will ensure room for expansion. Now for the second plank. The left side of the new plank will seat itself nicely in the tongue of the first plank like this. Once I get it set into place, I make sure they are tight together with no visible seam, and then use a mallet to seat it tightly. This is the plank that sits up against the exterior door threshold. I'll get rid of that tiny gap next to the threshold with some gray or beige caulk later. Before moving on, make sure that your two planks are completely lined up. If not, it'll mess up your install for the second row. Now these next two planks get added in the same way. I lock them into place on the exposed tongue on the right, lay them flat and make sure there's no visible joint, and then give them a few taps with the mallet. Then tap them from the side with the tapping block if needed to get them in perfect alignment. Now for the last piece in the first row, I need a partial piece that ends 1/4 inch from the wall. Expansion, remember. I could totally measure it out, mark and cut it, or I could use this trick. Flip the piece around, set it 1/4 inch from the wall, mark it where the previous piece ends. Now I'll cut it in this position, flip it back around, and it will seat perfectly in place. While again, the manufacturer boasts that you can cut this stuff with a utility knife, it's just a lot easier to use power tools to me. With the first row installed, the rest go pretty quick until you run into special cuts. The first piece of the new row sits on the long side tongue of the previous row. Like before, angle the piece from above, like this, and seat it into the tongue of row 1, then lay it flat. Notice the gap. You need to tap it in tight to row 1 before tapping it down tight from above. Do not just tap the plank directly with the mallet or you'll ruin the tongue. If you don't have a tapping block, you can use a piece of flooring, which works just as well in my opinion. Put the side which seats in the tongue against the plank and tap it until the seam disappears. Then tap it down tight from the top with a mallet. The second piece on the second row will be the first piece you install where you connect to 2 exposed tongues. Seat your plank in the long tongue first, and then carefully tap or slide it forward until it's perfectly aligned with the adjacent piece. Then tap it down into place with the mallet. Precision is important here so you don't have any gaps and also no lifted spaces in the planks, which can be sharp. I use my tapping tool as needed to ensure that there are no seams in any of the joints. Each new plank after this will follow the same approach from here through the end of the row. If you have a perfectly rectangular room, the rest is cake. Most likely though, you've got some tricky spots to work around, like this closet area. So I'll show you my approach in this space. For this closet, I'll need to cut a 5-inch section out of a plank for it to sit on either side of the wall that separates the closet from the rest of the room. Additionally, this plank will connect the first 3 rows inside of the closet to the first 3 outside of the closet. So here we go. I'll definitely use my oscillating tool for a precision cut like this. After measuring and marking the needed cut, I carefully cut all 3 lines and remove the cutout. Next, I install this piece like the others, and it's pretty satisfying when the 2 sections come together. Watch these connect. Oh yeah, that's good. That's real good. We'll keep moving on time lapse until we get to the other side of the closet. Just like before, I measure and cut the cutout for the wall separating the closet from the room on this side, then continue installing the row. I continue this along until we get to the final row that goes in the closet. And now this piece will cause you to lose your religion if you don't have this handy tool, the pull bar. As you can see, when you rip your final piece and attempt to tap it into place, the wall is totally in the way of your tapping tool. To get rid of the gap here, this will be kind of hard to see in the small closet, but we're going to use the pull bar. Set the wider end of the pull bar between the plank and the wall and pound the short side sticking up with a mallet or hammer like this. This pull bar will show up again in a bit, so you will have a better look at it. This was just a taste. Halfway through the install, we come to the doorway between this bedroom and the bathroom. A transition will be installed here, which will include this metal track that gets attached to the concrete below, and this finishing piece locks into place on that track and extends an inch or so beyond the track on either side. As such, I'll start these rows about an inch from where the vinyl flooring in the bathroom ends, here. To get there, I'm going to use my pull saw to make sure my flooring can make it under the door trim. I'll use a waste piece of flooring as a guide for the pull saw and carefully cut away the area of the trim that's in the way of the flooring. Now the flooring can slide right into place. I use my oscillating tool to remove a small portion of this plank that we don't need and then slide it into position, leaving about an inch of space between this flooring and the bathroom flooring for the transition. And now another satisfying bit of time lapse to get us close to the end. Looks exhausting. Now's a good time to gnaw on some aspirin while you watch. And now for the final row. If we were mathing correctly at the beginning, we should have at least half a plank thickness in the final row. And hey, check this out. The math works, see? This final row is where it all comes together, and it'll be in these final minutes of game time when the pull bar will earn its MVP status for the day. I rip each of these planks to size, and then comes the pull bar. For each plank, after it's seated in the tongue, I saddle the wide end of the pull bar between the plank and the wall and pound the other end with my mallet until the joint gap disappears. So good! Now for cleanup, and as promised, I have this Levoit Elvac 200 cordless vacuum, and this thing is awesome. The rechargeable battery lasts for 50 minutes on low mode. This vacuum is perfect for jobs like this hard floor, but it's also a champ on carpet. It can lay down flat and only needs a couple of inches of clearance to get under furniture. And the motor brush even has lights to help you spot your floor nasties. It comes with a crevice brush combo tool, which is perfect for cleaning the perimeter of the room. You can also remove the extension arm and add the attachments directly to the unit itself. Now it's a hand vac for close-up jobs. This vacuum is currently a top seller on Amazon, and for good reason. You'll find links to the Levoit store and some of their products in the video description in case you need them. Okay, now the flooring is installed and clean, and I'm ready to trim out this room and finish it up. When all is said and done, I ended up using 13.5 of my 14 boxes of flooring, so our purchasing calculation worked perfectly. If you'd like to see all of the videos of this room being built from the very beginning, I've got a playlist you can check out right here. And if after seeing this video, if you feel like I've earned your subscription, you can do so by clicking the ManCycle logo right here. See you next time. 107.